Welcome back to Yoga Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Waycott. We are back for part 4 of this month's 4-part series all about sustainability for yoga teachers. So over the past few weeks for the month of January, we have been asking ourselves some really honest questions like what we are really available for right now, what it means to teach in a way that keeps us resourced, and how can we build careers that support both our personal well-being as teachers while also supporting the well-being of our communities. So these are big questions that I definitely don't have all of the answers to. But today's episode is really about zooming out, looking at the bigger picture, and looking at like the long-term picture of what it takes and what is helpful if we want to do this work long-term. And this whole topic feels very timely for me right now because I've had another really busy week, and it's kind of ironic that I've had such a busy week and I'm talking about like sustainability for yoga teachers. And I feel like I said this last week too, like last week was busy as well, but it was one of those weeks where it felt like I did a month's worth of work in 7 days. And thankfully things will, I think, like go at a more moderate pace for me next week. That's the plan. But, you know, even like just knowing that I can't operate at this pace all the time, that is a sustainability practice and that is awareness. But I had a bunch of different meetings this week. I had a bunch of calls. I had month-end admin, newsletters to write. I was driving a lot. I felt like I was driving like back and forth all over my area to like get to different places that maybe I don't normally have to go to as part of my weekly routine in kind of like a more normal week for me. I also recorded like a little mini online course this week. I started doing voiceover for some online yoga classes, and like there's just a lot of moving parts right now. I'm really glad that I am someone who uses a calendar, because if I didn't put things into my calendar so religiously, there's like no way that I could remember all of these different things that I have to do and like all of the places I have to be. Like if it's not in my calendar, it doesn't exist. Big Google Calendar fan. But you know, like one of the things that made this week manageable, even though it was super busy, and like this isn't my normal pace, it was the fact that I planned ahead. I knew I was going to be having a really busy week, and that meant that I planned my yoga classes in advance because I didn't want to be scrambling 30 minutes before I had to leave the house to come up with something to teach. I also worked with the same theme across all of my classes this week, and that was part of the monthly theme that I've been working with. So again, planning ahead, trying to make things like a little bit easier and smoother for myself wherever I can. I also didn't try to fit everything into my week. So like when it's super busy, it usually means that like something else kind of has to go. So for me, that meant that I didn't go to all of the usual workout classes that I'd like to go to. It meant that I said no to a couple of more like spontaneous invites to go do things. Waylon just brought me his pumpkin toy. It's January, but he has a Halloween toy right now. So yeah, but like I said no to spontaneous things, like just because I knew I didn't have time for them, and I scheduled them for in the future. Yeah, and I mean, like I'm saying this out loud because this is the kind of behind the scenes planning ahead that helps keep things from tipping into that burnout territory. So Another thing that's going on for me this week and kind of like this upcoming month is that I'm adding an extra yoga class to my pre-registered yoga class schedule. And part of the reason for this is just to help accommodate demand. Like classes have been super busy, and part of that is January. Like yoga teachers know, typically in the new year, you get an influx of people kind of coming back to class. But classes have been getting busier and busier for a while, and it's either time to get a bigger space or add more classes to the schedule, or, kind of find a balance. And so that actually feels exciting to like just temporarily put an extra class on the schedule, because I have been teaching the exact same pre-registered class schedule in the exact same space for many years now. And it's kind of fun to have a change. So we're just doing it for February right now. I'm just saying for everyone, like it's a temporary addition, and we'll kind of reassess and go from there. And earlier this week, I was talking to a friend of mine who teaches Pilates, and her classes are really full right now too. And she said something that really stood out to me when we were having a conversation. And she said that sometimes the demand is there and things are really busy, right? We go through busy seasons, and like you could keep adding classes to your schedule and you could keep filling them. But at some point, you have to decide how much you can realistically teach without burning out, or compromising on the quality of what you're offering. And when she said that, I was like, yes, because this is exactly what I'm going through right now. This is exactly the theme that I'm sitting with and, sharing with all of you for the whole month. It's like, and it's hard. Like, it's hard to be in that position where you want to please people, you want to accommodate everybody who, wants to come to class. Like, it's a good problem to have. And we all have different limits, and we all only have so much energy to expend every week. We all only have so much to give. And sometimes you just have to kind of draw that line and say, nope, like, I wish I could, but this is my capacity right now. And I just thought that it was really affirming to hear someone in an adjacent industry, like obviously very similar, being a Pilates teacher and being a yoga teacher. But it just felt so affirming to hear somebody kind of saying the same thing and like naming it out loud. And it reminded me why it's so important to have these conversations, whether it's in person with your peers in your community or conversations that are happening like in the form of a podcast. So I want to move into part 4 of our series today. And over the course of the month, we have looked at some of the systemic factors that cause burnout for yoga teachers. And we've considered what's going well in our businesses right now, what needs to shift. We have looked at capacity as something that is fluid and always changing, and something that we always, have to keep working with. We talked about small practical changes that you can make to your teaching to help make like the mental load more manageable, the energetic output more manageable. That was last week's episode. And today I want to zoom out, talk a little bit about the long game, and talk about what you can do to make teaching yoga a viable and sustainable career option. And like I've said before in this series, I don't have all of the answers. Like, I am constantly learning and making mistakes as I go. But in my experience and in the last 14 years of teaching yoga, like, I have realized that there are some things that work and that there are some patterns, especially among yoga teachers who seem to have like found their groove and who are making teaching work for them. And I think that one of the most important pieces to long-term sustainability, in my experience, is that you're not relying on just one stream of income. I think it's important to have a few different streams of income rather than relying on just one thing or like one type of teaching. And something that I want to emphasize is that not all of your streams of income have to be big, because everything adds up, everything counts. And I think having income coming from different places gives you a little bit of a safety net, so that if something disappears, you're not going to be panicking. You're going to feel like you have options. So what does this look like then? What does it mean to have diverse streams of income as a yoga teacher? So for many teachers, the most consistent income, but not necessarily the highest income, comes from weekly classes. So whether that's studio yoga classes, community center yoga classes, it could be a corporate gig. It might be like an independent rental where you are renting a hall in your community and inviting people for drop-ins, or you are running a pre-registered series. Some of you might also be teaching weekly private lessons that are part of one of your sort of core streams of income. And if you have your own yoga school and you're a yoga teacher trainer, you are going to see income coming in from trainings, but that income is not typically spread across like all 12 months of the year. You might also guest teach or assist in someone else's training, or in a training that takes place at your studio, or training that's like affiliated with the studio that you teach at. So those tend to be like some of the more consistent sources of income for yoga teachers. And then there are going to be income streams that aren't always weekly, and they might not even be monthly. They might kind of just come through at certain points of the year. But these are often streams of income where you are better paid for your time. So think like yoga workshops, continuing education, retreats, even day retreats, or like immersive experiences where maybe you take your students somewhere to a special location, like just for a day, right? And you really dive in together. It could be intensives, special events, mentorship if you're in the position to be mentoring newer teachers, membership communities, paid speaking engagements or paid presentations. And then you also have income that I would consider to be semi-passive. So these are going to be things like recorded content, online courses, recordings that you host on a platform like Insight Timer, for example. And what I love about diversified income, and like keep in mind, it takes time to build it up and it takes time to develop those different streams. It usually doesn't happen like right out of yoga teacher training or even in the first couple of years. But it gives you the freedom to say no to gigs that are like underpaid or gigs that are misaligned. So it allows you to be maybe just a little bit more selective with your time and your energy and where you teach when you have like multiple things going on, so that you're not in a position where you're feeling desperate and feeling like you have to say yes to something even though you don't really feel great about it. And it also means that hopefully you're able to take a little bit of time off from teaching without feeling stressed about it, or that you're able to take a little step back if you need to, say, recover from injury or like a procedure or something like that. So I think of income diversification for yoga teachers as another insurance policy. And I'm always saying, like, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And that means, like, try to spread yourself out, a little bit if you can. And I don't want to frame this from a scarcity mindset. Like when I say, oh, this is an insurance policy, as if we need backup plans because something bad is always going to happen. Like that's not always the case, right? So I don't want it to be like, you need to have all these things in place because they're going to be taken away from you. Like that's not true. But we have to be realistic and we have to remember that as yoga teachers, if you are a contractor where you live, you're not going to have the same protections as an employee. So you do need to look out for yourself. You do need to take those extra steps to make sure that you're protected and taken care of. But I also think that like diversifying your streams of income can be really nourishing in like a creative sense as well. So it's not just about like getting money from different sources. It's about working in different ways that is going to help keep things fresh for you. And it probably means that you're going to get to work with different people, for example. So maybe the people who come to my yoga teacher trainings are not necessarily the people who are coming to my weekly classes, right? Those might be like two different demographics of people. So it means you get to work with different people. It means that you also get to use different parts of your skill set. It's one thing to teach an educational workshop to, a small group of like really engaged teachers. It's another to teach a really energetic, high energy, like big yoga event in a shopping center, for example, right? Where maybe things are a little bit chaotic and like you're not going to be able to necessarily correct people on their form and things like that. Like we all have a whole like spectrum available to us in terms of our skills. And so teaching in different ways allows you to tap into those different skills and use them in different contexts. And I think that variety in your teaching can feel more sustainable, like mentally and spiritually. I also want to normalize the fact that your income streams can shift a little bit, like with the seasons and every year. So it's not always going to be this like upward trajectory of making more and more money every single year. It might be, but in my experience, that's not always the case. Like you are going to have some years where there's lots of opportunities, you're teaching a lot, maybe you are running trainings or having success with events. And then you might also have years where like, I've talked about this before, but like you are engaged in your own studies. Like maybe you've committed to a big training program and that means that you're dedicating time to that and you don't have the extra mental capacity to be like developing new classes or workshops or whatnot. And then you're going to have years where you are working behind the scenes and you're kind of in the thick of that creative process, or you're developing something and like building a program or building a training behind the scenes. And like that's super time consuming. So it means that you're not going to have as much time available to you to like say yes to teaching or yes to subbing. And it's also one of those things where you have to be patient for the rewards because like you're doing all that behind the scenes unpaid work and in the long run it's going to pay off and you're going to see the results, but it might not be for like a couple of years. So just like whatever season you're in, it's okay. And we go through all of them. And my current ecosystem of offerings didn't arrive all at once. Like my teaching did not always look like this. It took a lot of years to find my groove and I'm still finding it. I taught studio classes and community center classes for a really long time while I was learning to teach and while I was becoming established in my community, and kind of like, building myself up. And then there have absolutely been times where like one stream of income dries up totally unexpectedly and like you didn't know that thing was going to end. But if you have diverse streams of income, then hopefully it's not like totally shattering when those things happen, because you know that you've got some other things to fall back on or some other things to put more attention or like energy into. And there have also been times where something I was doing was unsustainable. So for example, I used to teach yoga for a nonprofit and I had a bit of a commute to get to those classes. And I started to realize that the amount of money that I was spending on gas for my vehicle to get to those classes was more than I was making to teach the classes. And it got to a point where like I had to let those classes go because it wasn't sustainable for me to be paying to teach. And maybe if I, lived closer to where those classes were, it would have worked out. But when you have, multiple streams of income happening, it kind of gives you that freedom to be able to say, okay, I think I can drop this because it's not the most sustainable. So income diversification is definitely something to experiment with in 2026. If there's something that you're kind of hearing here that like maybe you haven't explored yet, but you're curious about, you should do it for this coming year. Like host a series on Zoom. Maybe you create and host your first yoga workshop. You could put yourself out there and look for a corporate yoga gig, like going into someone's workplace. And I think that could be really exciting. Now, the next topic in terms of like thinking big picture, long term, when it comes to what makes this feasible for us to do this work as yoga teachers, is to not pigeonhole yourself too tightly into one box. So you are allowed to evolve, you are allowed to change, and you don't have to teach the same way or the same thing forever. And I feel like the messaging around finding success as a yoga teacher used to be really big on finding a niche. And the recommendation was always like, you need to pick one thing and you need to get really good at it and be the expert at it. And then you're going to have a successful career as a yoga teacher. And that may have worked in the past, and it probably still does work for some people. But what my concern is about like getting yourself too stuck in one box is that there is a risk of cutting yourself out of opportunities for growth or expansion or whatever it is if you're only known for teaching one way in one format. So if you have boxed yourself up into like one identity or saying, I only work with this one demographic of students, like it's fine if you want to do that, but you might be missing out on something really great. So sustainability requires some room for us to grow and to change our minds and to adapt the way that we teach as we age and as our students age. And I just want to give you an example to kind of illustrate like what this looks like. So during COVID, I was doing a ton of teaching online. All the studios shut down. I immediately pivoted and I was like, I'm going to keep showing up for my students every week and I'm going to find a way. Like I'm so determined and we're going to keep doing this thing. And so I was filming yoga videos every week and putting them on my own online platform. I was hosting Zoom classes. I was teaching Zoom privates. I was getting grants to teach like free community Zoom classes. Like I was all in it. And then a little bit kind of further into COVID, I was working for like someone else's online yoga platform. So I was doing work in the back end and distribution and marketing. And that meant that I was just like involved in online yoga all the time, like every single day. And then like in addition to that, I was taking online trainings, online workshops. All of the classes that I was taking were online. And I reached a point where I started to experience a lot of digital fatigue. I was so tired of being on Zoom every day. I was tired of doing voiceovers for my own yoga videos. And as in-person yoga classes started to become more consistent, I decided to completely go back to in-person stuff. I was like, I want to be in community. I want to be in the room with my students. I want to hear them breathing. I want to be sweaty with everyone. And like what happened was that a lot of my marketing about my classes and offerings and trainings started to shift. And a lot of the things that I was talking about were the fact that like everything I was doing was 100% in person. And that was my differentiator because so many like trainings and CE options, especially, were still totally online or hybrid. So the thing that I was focusing on, because it made me stand out, was like, I do everything in person. And here's the benefits to being like fully in person in the room with your teacher, especially in the context of a 200-hour yoga teacher training. So I was really kind of like talking from that one perspective. And a business mentor of mine reminded me a year or so ago to be careful about putting myself in a box, because there may be a time where I decide that going online for some aspects of my work might be supportive. And that is exactly what's happening. Now, I am still a huge advocate for in-person training and like being in a room with a real teacher. I think that's really, really important. But I'm personally shifting some small aspects of some of my offerings into more evergreen and pre-recorded content in order to do a better job protecting my energy and protecting my time. And that is all in the name of sustainability. So I just want to give you that example that it's okay to change your mind. And that, yeah, if you pigeonhole yourself too hard into one little area, that it can be really difficult to like get out of it if you decide that you want to do something a little bit different. But I really believe that if you stay grounded and you stay transparent, your students are going to grow with you, and they don't need you to be the same forever, right? Like you're allowed to evolve, you're allowed to change your mind, and especially if it's going to make your work more sustainable. Now, another suggestion that I have, again, thinking big picture here, is to stay open to collaboration, especially if you like working with other people, but be selective about it. So this is a reminder that you don't have to do everything alone. And collaborating with another yoga teacher or somebody in a similar industry who has a complementary skill set can be really energy saving and actually like really energy giving if it's done well. Now, collaboration can offer a lot of different things, and one of them is that you hopefully, if it's a good collaboration, get to share the workload with somebody else. So that means that you could share the preparation for, let's say you're teaching a workshop with another teacher. You share the preparation for it. You could share the marketing, the actual teaching and like delivery of the content. I find that even just having another person there to help hold that energetic space in the room feels really supportive, because it's a big job to hold space for anything really as a yoga teacher. Like sometimes it's just nice to know that somebody else is there too, and they're like in it with you. Just teaching feels different when you do it with someone else. You also are going to be sharing audiences. So you have access to each other's audiences, maybe getting in front of each other's like followings on social media, for example. You get to share creativity. And I think that the mental load hopefully decreases when you have someone to bounce ideas off of. There are some signs that a collaboration is a good fit. So one of them is that you mutually respect and admire each other's work. So collaborate with people that you really like. It sounds obvious. And I would suggest that you have clear roles kind of laid out ahead of time, clear expectations. Sometimes these are going to be based on things that you're good at. So you might have different skills that complement each other. One of you might be really good at writing copy and like a description for your event. Another one of you might decide that you're going to design a landing page for it or digital assets, or one of you is going to like put together the resources for your workshop or your training into a manual. But just make sure that those roles are made clear ahead of time. I do find that if you find someone that you work really well with, those roles seem to just kind of work themselves out naturally, which is nice. But if it's someone who you don't know very well that you were collaborating with, you might have to sit down and kind of clarify those from the get-go. And then you want to hope that you have shared values around money with the person that you are collaborating with, shared values around intellectual property. And one thing that I would add, and this one is kind of like, take it with a grain of salt because it really just depends on the situation and the circumstance. But I like to look for someone who has kind of equally engaged audiences. So I always find that it feels best if the person I'm collaborating with and myself are both able to bring in students for the event, for example. Because it does kind of feel weird if you're collaborating with someone and like everyone who signs up is only people that know you and like nobody who knows the other person. Like you want it to ideally be mutually beneficial. Like say you're running a retreat with someone, hopefully people are signing up through both of you or because of both of you. So yeah, that's more of like just a personal one for me. And I would say that like some of the most supportive moments in my career as a yoga teacher have come from shared projects and like shared teaching. It does feel really, really good to be able to teach alongside someone else, especially if it's someone that you mesh with, someone that you trust. It just really lightens the workload and like gives you that feeling that you're supported and that teaching yoga doesn't have to feel lonely. It's just like gives me the warm fuzzies to collaborate with somebody who I really like and respect. So these days, before I collaborate with anyone, I ask myself, like, do I admire this person's work? Are the roles going to be clear? Does this feel energizing and like exciting for me? Or does this feel like I'm actually going to be creating more work for myself somehow by working, in this relationship? So I think being discerning is part of sustainability too. But ideally, if you are collaborating, you want it to feel like it's nourishing and like the work is shared. And I truly believe that there are going to be those nourishing and really positive like working relationships out there for you with other teachers or other wellness practitioners. Like it can be just so fun and so mutually beneficial. So just know that finding a steady rhythm and kind of like finding your groove when it comes to teaching, it takes time, especially if you find yourself comparing to others. Like, just remember, everyone has a different capacity. Everyone has different life circumstances that you don't know about going on behind the scenes. And so things that look easy from the outside, if you are comparing yourself to another teacher and you're like, they make it look so easy and they're doing all these things and they have all these different, streams of income, like that usually represents what you see on the outside, usually represents years of trial and error that you didn't see. It usually represents seasons where they have totally overdone it, seasons where they've experienced burnout and they were kind of learning what doesn't work. So just remind yourself that like it takes time. There is a journey that you didn't see behind the scenes, especially if you're prone to comparison. Just like be patient with it. And I want to close out this series by asking you to get really honest with yourself. So I have a couple more questions for you because that's kind of been the theme here throughout the month. So here's the big one. My big question for you is, if nothing changed in your teaching life over the next year, how would you feel? If you kept teaching at the same pace, in the same way, how would that feel? I would also ask yourself, are you holding on to anything in your teaching right now because it feels familiar? And what are you curious about that you haven't given yourself time to explore or permission to explore? So maybe there is another stream of income that you want to explore, like adding to your work this coming year. I think that part of sustainability, a big part of sustainability, is about staying in relationship with your work. It's about paying attention to what needs to shift and then trusting that if you shift something or if you change something, it's not a bad thing. It is usually an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to try again. I don't have all the answers. And like the way that I teach is always evolving. My business changes every year. I am still learning. I'm still making mistakes. I am adjusting things all the time. Like this is just, it is an ongoing relationship that it has no end, right? This is just is what it is. But I do believe in staying curious. Like, don't stay in something just because it feels familiar or feels comfortable. Stay curious. I think that we have to be willing to revisit what's working and what isn't as well in order to make choices that support us so that we can keep showing up and doing this work that is so valuable and so needed for our communities without losing ourselves in the process. And that's like the biggest thing here, right? How do we stay anchored in our center while also supporting everyone around us? I hope that this series has given you permission to keep evolving. And I also hope that it's given you permission to meet yourself where you're at in this season of your work. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you tuning in to Yoga Insider Podcast and just like spending your time with me. It means so much. Please leave a review for the podcast wherever you're listening. If you've made it all the way to the end of this episode, reviews help the podcast just get up there in the algorithm so that more yoga teachers around the world can tune in and be part of the conversation. So once again, this was Yoga Insider Podcast. My name is Alex Waycott, and I will see you next time.